Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ, the weekly podcast for growth-minded healthcare professionals. Now, whether you're a dentist, physio, doctor, or other healthcare professional, we talk about what's required personally and professionally to get your practice growing faster. My guest today is Pete Williams. Pete Williams is an entrepreneur, advisor, and marketer who Forbes recently called one entrepreneur today that every marketer should be modeling, while Inc. describes him as a savvy marketing strategist. He's won a number of international business awards, started companies in varying industries from telecommunications to e-commerce, and even sold Australia's version of Yankee Stadium, the MCG, for under $500 at age 21. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, Angus. Appreciate it. It's a pretty impressive intro I've got to live up to now. So thanks for that. Put the pressure on me.
And look, I should tell the listeners and viewers, the truth is Pete and I have stumbled across each other in more ways than I think even we realise, because as I was researching for this interview, you and I have a common link that I didn't know about until I saw this. I might have even met you because I remember the whole thing about the MCG. I think you are somehow connected with Steve McKnight. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So Steve, for those who don't know, is a real estate investor and written a couple of best-selling books. And I was actually featured in his second or third book at one point. So yes.
There you go. So that's that. And the other thing, full disclosure, and Pete's background and what he does to keep himself busy is actually quite an extraordinary list. But he is, in all of his spare time, lecturing at Deakin University with I guess an entrepreneurial program.
Yeah.
And as we speak, I'm the subject of one of his groups who's kind of putting my business.
I call them guinea pigs. You call them subjects. I think probably subjects is a much better term to use.
Indeed. Now, look, before we get into, your quite extraordinary background, and of course, the question that our listeners are wanting to know, well, what's this got to do with Practice Growth HQ? Let's do the fast five so people can get to know you a bit better, quicker. So question number one, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Bacchus Marsh, which is sort of just on the outskirts, on the edge of regional Victoria. Yeah, it's a great place to live. I think the story goes that if a doctor gives you 5 years to live, move to Bacchus Marsh because every week feels like an eternity. There wasn't much to do there growing up.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it. That's actually 45 minutes from where I am now. I'm pleased to say where I am now does not feel like that. All right, second question. Favourite book? You're not allowed to say your own.
Oh, Claude Hopkins' My Life in Advertising.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting one.
All right. 1924, 1923, 1934. Anyway, early 1900s.
Just for the podcast listeners, Pete in no way looks like he was alive in 1923. All right, question three. What's one of your superpowers?
Oh, good question. I think it would be being able to see second-order consequences. And that sounds really, really weird, and hopefully don't go off too much of a tangent. But I think one of the things that I am good at in terms of business is seeing what's the second-order consequence of a particular marketing strategy, tactic, situation, sort of thinking ahead a few steps. That sort of seems to be where I've somehow stumbled onto success a little bit across the journey.
Very good. Question four, something you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
Oh, my 20-year-old self. Girls are not that scary. Probably doesn't help the podcast, but that's probably what my 20-year-old or 16 and 17-year-old
I don't know.
Should
You never know who's listening, do you? And then question number five, what's something that you're grateful for?
I think opportunities. I think, very lucky sort of, we're in lockdown here in Australia at the moment, but still I think over the journey there's been lots of opportunities to sort of be able to stumble and test and try crazy things like Steve McKnight's programs and MCGs and bits and pieces like that. So I think just the opportunities that I've kind of been able to stumble in and stumble onto.
Good man. Now, look, I brought Pete on to the show because A, I find him interesting, and B, the insights that he brings from a marketing point of view, and, you talked about that second order implications from a business point of view. But I want to start with the first time I became aware of you, and this is a story that must be told, which is that basically, in simple terms, for listeners outside Australia, the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, in the intro I described it as Australia's version of Yankee Stadium. It's by far the biggest stadium in Australia. And Pete, as an entrepreneurial 21-year-old, started selling part of it. Tell us about that.
So, yes, I was 21 and I was reading a book, which is not my favorite book, and I wouldn't recommend people read it, but it is a book that changed my life. It's called The 1 Minute Millionaire. And literally in just one chapter, in one part of the book, it references this guy called Paul Hartunian, who back in the 1980s, I think it was, sold pieces of timber from the Brooklyn Bridge in Manhattan. And word around the campfire was he made like $2 million selling these little certificates. And I was like, how the heck can I take that idea and replicate it here in Australia? And part of the MCG, that Melbourne Cricket Ground, was getting redeveloped for the upcoming Commonwealth Games that we had in Australia in 2006. Anyway, I remember going to the football and the cricket with my dad and sitting on some really, really uncomfortable wooden slatted seats. And I went, I'm going to take this idea from the US and kind of see if I can track down some of that timber and make certificates the same. Anyway, a few phone calls, found the wrecking company that was doing the demolition. And they sort of said, yeah, we've got some timber. It's just sitting here in the warehouse. We're a wrecking company. We have no value in this stuff. We've also got some carpet. And it sounds really weird, but the MCC, which is sort of a members area or a membership part of the ground, is really prestigious. It's a bit of a rite of passage here in Australia, particularly in Melbourne. If you have kids, you put them on the wait list. It's like 30, 40 years for them to become a member. But the carpet was really well known and really ugly. Anyway, for those watching the podcast, you'll be able to see this. But basically, the carpet had the actual crest of the MCC. So I bought all of that and made a series of memorabilia pieces up with a photo of the MCG, a piece of the carpet, and basically wrote a press release saying 21-year-old sells the MCG for $500. And it kind of went pretty bonkers here in Australia. Obviously, that headline's pretty catchy. And for a sport-mad nation and a sport-mad city, it was a great sort of first foray into business for me in terms of what that produced in, experience and awareness and revenue, and led to a book deal and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff for me. So that was my first sort of real stumbling into, quote unquote, business success, I guess.
Well, that's great. The funny thing is, I'm going to take a punt and say I'm a fair bit older than you. I actually remember that carpet. I'm not a member, but I've got some family members who are, and it is exactly as you describe it. In fact, before they tore it up, that part of the MCC was like, what's the expression? I believe they call it an anachronism. It's like something from another time. You'd walk in there and it was, I don't know, but I imagine it felt like being in the 1920s or something. So there you go.
Totally. Yeah, it was really prestigious. The actual carpet that I got was from the dining room, which was actually in the Ponsford stand next to the MCC pavilion itself. And from a marketing perspective, when I got the carpet, we were like, who's the best people to sell it back to? And we thought, the members of the MCC will be the perfect audience to market it to. And had a meeting with the MCC themselves, or the MCG, and they turned around and said, no, we're not going to give you access to our database. I'm not going to let you market to our community. So we obviously, the press release and went that way. But about 2 weeks later, they announced when they were pulling down that part of the grandstand, which was the next part of the renovation, they were going to do their own auction and their own kind of release of bits and pieces from the grandstand. So, whether they ripped me off or copied my idea, I can't really complain, because obviously I got inspiration from someone overseas with another idea. So it was a very interesting little project.
How many of those squares did you sell?
Look, quite a few. Basically, each carpet square is about the size of an A4 piece of paper.
Yep.
And bought almost a basketball court size. So
wow.
There was a significant amount of carpet. I did a bunch of different series over the journey with different photos and different sort of layouts and stuff like that to kind of like re-release different scenarios. And the naivety of a 21, 22-year-old, I didn't keep the most accurate records at the time. So although we did series and limited them, some series didn't quite sell out. So again, I'm not sure if it was like 300 of that 400 series got sold or 356 of that 400 series. Right. Wasn't the best record keeper at the time, as 21 and 22-year-olds tend not to be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great story nevertheless. So let's, I think probably for the listeners, let's take you from 21-year-old until the one thing that I really do want to focus on during our talk today is one of a number of your books, but the one that's perhaps the most relevant, which is Cadence, A Tale of Fast Business Growth. And I would imagine if people are sitting here listening to Practice Growth HQ, then they've got a strong interest in growth. Tell us about what led to you writing that book, and then we're going to talk about your 7 levers.
Yeah, sure. Well, the book kind of came after a while of our own success. You mentioned earlier, we're predominantly in the telco space. That's where a bunch of the companies in our portfolio are based. And as we grew those businesses, we kind of started looking at, what was similar across the businesses, what was similar in other companies, what caused those growth. We had some issues where we kind of hit a glass ceiling in one of our companies where we couldn't quite continue to grow the revenue figure. And we were sort of stumbling at what's the blockage, where is it, what's causing it. And we looked around and kind of stumbled across these 7 areas that, whether you're an e-commerce business, you're a service business, you're a dentist, you're a gardener, you're a chiropractor, no matter what your industry, effectively these 7 areas apply to every business. And we kind of realized that was the case for our business. And when we started looking at each of these areas individually and started focusing on what are we doing to influence each of these areas in a very systematic and focused way, that shifted the trajectory of our companies across the journey. So basically with that, we kind of, won a bunch of awards and did a bunch of interviews of speaking about sort of the success we've had, and started sharing kind of this framework that we've used across the last sort of decade or so. And that kind of what led to Cadence, in that it was like, let's try and put it into a book that other business owners can take and learn and apply, and hopefully have similar success along their journey.
Okay, so before we get into these 7 steps, let's just take us from the 21-year-old, selling the MCG for $500. Love the headline.
Yeah.
Did you have a pretty strong business bent from a young age?
Yeah, pretty much. My mum loves to tell this story that when I was 3 or 4, apparently I drew arrows with crayon all the way down the hallway. And apparently, this is mum's story, before she, told me off and made me wash it off, she sat down and she calmly asked me, why did I draw these arrows? And apparently my response was at the time, so you can find my office, mummy. So I've kind of always been apparently this business way inclined. Started my first company when I was 16, which was called Impact Plus, which was a web design agency. I think we had 3 clients, my local high school, my local primary school, and the basketball team. But that was my first business that I registered. So I've always sort of been kind of entrepreneurial and business focused. So it's part of the DNA, but not from my parents. I think it's skipped a generation. And so did the MCG venture. And then obviously you mentioned I got a book deal off the back of that. And then started doing some marketing consulting, and effectively stumbled into the telco space with my now business partners. They had a business selling effectively discounted phone bills. It's probably the best way to describe it. And I kind of joined the team there, did some marketing consulting, and we realized there was this thing called Google that was just starting. So weird to kind of tell this story, talking about age. Well, there's the greatness and the big coming through, and this is when Google was starting. And we realized no one was kind of owning that space in the telco area. So we pivoted the business. I became a partner, and we started selling physical phone systems. And that's kind of how that journey started. We were doing a great job generating leads, generating inquiries, but we weren't phone technicians. So we weren't on the tools actually doing the installation. We still, 15 years later, I still have no idea how to program or install a phone system. But what we did is we actually outsourced that to effectively subcontractors all around the country. So we get a lead from someone, we tell them a solution, and then we pass them to a competitor effectively to go and actually do the install. And that was what caused this glass ceiling that I referenced earlier, in that when someone wanted to come back and buy again to get more handsets or expand their system or reprogram it or do anything else, they weren't calling us. They were calling the company that turned up and actually did the installation for them 3, 6, 12 months ago. And that was sort of the impetus for us to go, okay, hang on, what's causing our growth? Because we weren't getting any repeat business. And that was effectively one of the 7 levers that we discovered. And that's how kind of everything exploded from there.
Okay. So before we, I've been talking up the 7 levers, which we'll cover, I swear, in just a second. But I think I can say I kind of met you the second time through a mutual contact, Dale Beaumont. And you were going through the 7 levers there, which I really enjoyed the presentation. And then you said, well, we're looking for guinea pigs. How did you end up, I guess, teaching an entrepreneurial course at Deakin Uni?
Yeah, that's a crazy story in its own right. So I was Deakin undergrad in Geelong. So that's sort of where I did my undergraduate. And then I can't remember how, but a few years later, I stumbled onto the advisory board of the Commerce Department. So kind of as an outside business owner, they wanted some people to kind of help guide the direction of the program. So I sat on that advisory board for a couple of years. It was a good experience. They ended up going in a different direction and sort of stopped all their advisory boards for a period of time. But when Cadence, the book, was coming out, what happened was I had all my business friends, Dale Beaumont and the likes, kind of giving me testimonials and, endorsements for the book. And I thought, how can I get some sort of academic to support the framework, to kind of say, well, there is an academic weight to what I'm talking about. It's not just, another business owner telling his story. So I reached out to the dean of the business school at Deakin and sort of said, hey, look, I'm undergraduate. Here's my success. I was on the Commerce Department, et cetera, et cetera. I have a new book coming out. I'd love to talk to you about it if you can make 10 minutes for coffee in your diary. So anyway, he made the time. I went and introduced myself, probably told him the MCG story because it's a great icebreaker, told him about the book, told him about business success, about the framework, et cetera, et cetera. Just said, look, I'd love to give you an advanced copy of the book and even draft a testimonial if you're happy to sort of read the book, endorse it and put your name to the testimonial. And Mike said, yep, not a problem at all. Love to do it. Send me across. But while you're here, and then basically started to explain to me that they had this idea of changing the way they were doing some of the teaching at Deakin, in that they wanted to do more and more real world experience stuff for students. And one of the things they wanted to do is have this consulting clinic. They had a law consulting clinic for a number of years where if you wanted to have some IP work or some family work or a whole bunch of different law stuff being done, they've actually got a law clinic in downtown Melbourne that you can go to completely for free. And it's staffed by students in their final year of their law degree, I think, and have some lawyers sitting above it. It's a fantastic program. They wanted to do something similar for the business school and said, like, we've got this idea of doing some consulting clinic. Maybe the framework could be a perfect fit to kind of combine that. Do you want to run it? We'll call you a professor of practice. And it was purely, I think, almost the ego of that title that I went, done, sold. So I basically walked into this meeting to get a little testimony for my book, and I somehow walked out with a job running this program. And 3 or 4 years on now, it's been great success, fantastic feedback from clients like yourself. Students have been loving it, getting that sort of real world experience of consulting and understanding how small businesses run, because so much of academic teaching is all about Coca-Cola and Boeing and Tesla and all these large companies that, so many business students will have no exposure to, because most of them are going to go and work for a small SME. So we've been able to sort of shift this around and we've had clients in the program like yourself. We've had clients who manufacture dental chemicals and all the stuff that dentists use in their practices. They've been a client. We've had web design agencies. We've had masseuses. We've had, it's been such a great experience giving clients the ability to sort of learn about this framework, but also students the ability to actually get some experience too. So it's been a crazy fun journey the last few years as well.
Good one. Well, all right, let's put the listeners out of their misery. 7 levers. Now, I just have to ask you, Pete, I notice have you lived in the US? Because I notice you say 7 levers, and which is it's a bit of an Americanism, and I thought, maybe you've lived in the US for a while.
Spent a lot of time in Florida when I finished university. So literally between that university and the MCG story, I actually lived in Florida for a while, and then had some family moved to Sacramento, so I visited them a lot. So it's probably a bit of a take on that, and levers. Yeah,
no, it's fine.
Potato.
You've indoctrinated your students as well, because they were interviewing me the other day for my business. And the way that it works is I guess they interrogate the business owner, but I can tell they're looking at my business through the lens of these 7 levers, thinking, which one can we recommend that Angus implements? And indeed, at the time of recording, I think they're doing the big sort of ta-da. I think it's next week, so I'm always interested to see what they come up with. So tell us, while you're doing a little headset change there, tell us about the 7 levers. What's number one? Maybe what's the best way? Should we just mention them all or actually go through them?
So there's probably 2 big parts about the framework to kind of give a bit of context for everybody. One is that I think for so many business owners, you get off the tools, you're no longer practicing the dentistry at the particular time, or you're not doing the chiropractic work, and you sort of take some time to work on your business. You get kind of lost of what should I work on. So the framework, firstly, I think, because it kind of covers just the 7 drivers of revenue and profit for any business, it just gives you a good sort of framework of focus, which I think is really important, like understanding all the areas. The second part about it, which is really crazy, which blew our mind when we kind of just stumbled across it, is that if you actually just increase each area by 10%, so as you're focusing on each of these areas in your business and you say, look, I'm just going to try and improve each level by 10%, the actual result is a doubling of the profit. Just mathematics, just basic, simple maths. So the crazy thing is that for so many business owners, they try and grow their business and trying to be Babe Ruth, or if you use a cricket analogy, Don Bradman, trying to, hit home runs or sixes the whole time. And, it's hard to achieve that. And it's really hard to actually grow. Whereas small 10% wins actually can be a much more sustainable, realistic path to grow. So that's the crazy thing about this. So the 7 levers, fundamentally, the first lever is suspects. So what are people doing to actually get in front of or get awareness of your business in the first place? What are you doing to drive awareness in your business? That's traditional marketing effectively. So what are the things you do to drive people to your website, into your practice, into your retail store, whatever it might be? So suspects is the first lever. The second lever is prospects. And that is basically the percentage of those suspects that take some sort of micro commitment. So they do something to show you that they're more than just a window shopper or a tire kicker. A good example would be they take a car for the test drive if they're actually on a dealer's lot. They walk into a retail store, they try on the dress, or they try a pair of shoes. Maybe for a dentist, it's just booking an appointment or making an inquiry at the chiropractor's office about what they can do. So there's some sort of micro commitment that can be done. And obviously the way you communicate to those different people is very different in that, when someone is just, not aware of your business and you're trying to get them to make that awareness happen, you talk to them one way. Once they've already showed you they're interested in doing business with you, you talk to them a very different way. So suspects and prospects. Then you've got the conversions. What percentage or what group of those prospects actually take the next step and purchase from you? And those 3 groups, you can do different things to influence and impact each of those areas. Then you've got your average item price and items per sale. That's 4 and 5. So what is the average price of the services you offer to your clients? And then how do you get them to buy extra services whilst they're with you? So, for example, I used to race triathlons quite seriously. And I used to go and see a chiropractor and a masseuse through my training season. And I'd go there and I'd go in there for an hour and get, my back sorted, my legs massaged, whatever it might be. But every single time he did an amazing job of me walking out with something else. He'd always upsell me a massage ball or a bag of mud that I should put in the bath when I'm getting back for my next ride because it had some magnesium in there. And the training bands that are so popular, elastic bands these days, like this is 15, 20 years ago. Every time I'd walk out with something else. He was amazing at doing that. Would you like fries with that style approach? So he had a system in place where he was always trying to increase the amount of items I purchased. It wasn't just come and get the massage and leave. There was always something he was trying to offer me to do.